There's a hotel in rural Ohio that hasn't rented out room 306 in 11 years. Not because it's under renovation, not because of a plumbing issue. The room is fully functional. The bed is made, the lights work, the TV turns on. They just don't rent it out anymore. And when a journalist named Marcus Webb decided to find out why, he uncovered something that the county coroner, the local police department, and the hotel's ownership group had quietly agreed to never discuss publicly. What he found wasn't a ghost story, it was worse. The Crestview Motor Inn sits on Route 40 in Guernsey County, Ohio, about 20 minutes east of nowhere, if you're being honest about it. It's the kind of place that exists purely out of necessity. Truckers, traveling salespeople, the occasional family that missed their exit and decided to cut their losses for the night. 62 rooms across 2 floors. Vending machines in the lobby that still charge 1998 prices. A pool that's been filled with concrete since 2009. The place isn't charming. It isn't interesting. It's just there. Marcus Webb was 34 years old when he first heard about the Crestview. He wasn't a famous journalist, not by a long shot. He ran a regional blog out of Columbus called Ohio Undercurrent, where he covered local government corruption, forgotten crimes, and what he called the boring evil that happens in boring places. He had about 12,000 subscribers. He drove a 2011 Civic with one working window. He was just a guy trying to find stories that mattered. The tip came through his website's contact form in March of 2021. No name. Just an email address that traced back to a disposable account. The message was 3 sentences long. Room 306 at the Crestview Motor Inn in Guernsey County hasn't been rented since 2013. 6 guests stayed in that room in the 16 months before it was closed. Look into what happened to all 6 of them. Marcus almost deleted it. He got tips like this all the time. Conspiracy theories, personal vendettas, people who thought their neighbor was a government spy. But something made him pause. The specificity of it. 6 guests, 16 months. It wasn't the vague language of someone making things up. It read like someone who knew something and couldn't say it directly. So he started pulling at the thread. The first thing Marcus did was call the Crestview Motor Inn directly. He asked to speak with the manager and got a woman named Diane who had the flat, unbothered tone of someone who had answered too many phone calls in her life. He asked her about room 306. There was a pause, just a beat too long to be nothing. That room's not available, she said. He told her he wasn't trying to book it. He was a journalist. He was curious why the room hadn't been rented in 8 years. It's under renovation, she said. He thanked her and hung up. Then he drove to the Guernsey County Courthouse and spent 2 days going through public records. What he found was this. Between July 2012 and October 2013, 6 individuals checked into room 306 at the Crestview Motor Inn. All 6 checked in alone. All 6 were adults. All 6, within 18 months of their stay, experienced what the records described in different ways: a psychiatric hospitalization, a disappearance, an unexplained death, and in 3 cases, something the documentation called acute dissociative episodes requiring intervention. Marcus sat with that for a long time. 6 people, 1 room, 18 months. He told himself it was probably coincidence. Guernsey County had a population of around 39,000 people. Bad things happened to people all the time, and sometimes those people had stayed at the same budget motel. Correlation wasn't causation. He knew that. But he also knew that no one had rented that room since October 2013, and the renovation story didn't hold up because he'd already pulled the county's building permit records. No permits had ever been filed for the Crestview Motor Inn. He drove out to the hotel on a Wednesday afternoon. The Crestview looked exactly like it sounded. Faded brick exterior, a sign missing the second E in Crestview, a parking lot with more cracks than asphalt. The lobby smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. A teenage kid at the front desk looked up from his phone like Marcus had personally offended him by existing. Marcus asked to speak with Diane again. He waited 15 minutes in a plastic chair near the door before a woman in her late 50s came out from the back office. She was calm, professional. She shook his hand. He introduced himself, told her he was doing a piece on long-term vacancies in rural Ohio hospitality, kept it vague. Asked if he could look around the property. Diane smiled and said, "Of course." She walked him through the first floor, the exterior corridor, the concrete-filled pool. She talked about occupancy rates and the difficulty of competing with chain motels off the highway. She was pleasant and completely in control of the conversation. When they reached the stairwell to the second floor, Marcus casually mentioned he'd love to see a standard room if one was available. "Sure," Diane said. "I can show you 214. He followed her up the stairs. The second floor hallway was narrow and fluorescent lit, a single long corridor with numbered doors on both sides. Room 214 was toward the far end. Marcus noted that room 306 didn't exist on this floor, then realized the hotel only had 2 floors. He did the math quietly. Room 300 through 309 would have to be at the very end of the second floor, but the numbering on the doors jumped from 289 directly to 310. He stopped walking. "What's between 289 and 310? He asked. Diane didn't miss a beat. "Storage," she said. "Old elevator shaft, utility rooms. We renumbered years ago when we converted them." She kept walking. He followed, but he'd seen it. Partway down the hall, behind what appeared to be a utility closet door, there was a gap in the wall structure that was too large for a closet, and at the base of that door, barely visible in the dim hallway light, was a thin strip of carpet, the same beige carpet that every other guest room in the hotel had. That wasn't a utility closet. That was a door. Back in Columbus, Marcus spent 3 weeks tracking down the 6 guests. 2 had died, one in a car accident 14 months after his stay, one from what the death certificate listed as cardiac event of undetermined origin at age 31. One was unreachable. 2 had no public presence whatsoever, as if they'd quietly stepped out of their own lives. The 6th was a man named Gerald Prout, 61 years old, living in a VA-assisted care facility in Zanesville, about 30 miles from the Crestview. Marcus visited him on a Tuesday morning. Gerald was a Gulf War veteran, lucid and sharp, with the careful way of speaking that some people develop after years of being told their experiences aren't credible. He sat across from Marcus in a common room and folded his hands on the table. "I've been waiting for someone to ask," Gerald said. 8 years. He told Marcus that he'd stayed at the Crestview in September 2013, driving through on his way back from visiting his sister in Pittsburgh. He'd checked in around 9 at night. The clerk had given him room 306 without him asking. He remembered that specifically because he'd asked for a ground floor room and been told they were all full. They weren't. He could see empty ground floor rooms from the parking lot. The room looked normal, Gerald said. Standard layout, 2 queen beds, a small desk, a bathroom with a ventilation fan that rattled. He'd watched about an hour of television, turned off the light, and gone to sleep. He woke up at 2:47 a.m. He remembered the time exactly because he looked at the clock on the nightstand. He was sitting up in bed, and he didn't know why. The room was dark. The TV was off. The ventilation fan in the bathroom had stopped rattling, and there was a sound coming from the wall behind the headboard, not a knocking, not a scratching. He struggled to describe it. Even 8 years later, he said it sounded like breathing, but mechanical. Like something drawing air in and out at a pace that wasn't quite biological. Slow, too slow. Gerald said he turned on the lamp. He got out of bed. He put his hand flat against the wall. He said it was warm. Not warm the way a wall near a heater gets warm. Warm the way skin gets warm. He checked out at 3 a.m., told the night clerk the room had a maintenance issue, and paid for the full night without asking for a refund. He got in his car and drove for 2 hours before he stopped. He said the worst part wasn't the sound or the warmth. The worst part was that when he turned on the lamp and looked at the wall, he noticed the paint. Standard hotel, off-white, nothing unusual, except in one area, about 4 feet wide and 2 feet tall, starting just behind the headboard, the paint had tiny, nearly invisible cracks running through it in a specific pattern. He pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a photograph. He'd taken it before he left the room. The cracks in the paint weren't random. They formed letters, faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable once you saw them. They spelled the same 2 words over and over in different sizes, layered on top of each other like someone had been writing them for years. I'm inside. Marcus went back to the Crestview on a Friday night, this time alone, and rented a room on the 2nd floor, room 271, about 18 doors down from the utility closet that wasn't a utility closet. He waited until after midnight. The hallway at 12:30 a.m. was completely silent. He eased his door open and walked toward the unmarked door, phone in hand, camera running. The carpet muffled his steps. Every other room was dark beneath its door. The utility closet had a standard lock, the same kind used on the guest rooms. He'd bought a basic lockpick set online a week earlier and watched enough tutorials to be dangerous. It took him 11 minutes, but the lock turned. The door opened inward. The room behind it was room 306. It was completely intact. Bed made. TV on the dresser. Curtains drawn. The air inside was stale and pressurized in a way that made his ears pop slightly when he stepped in, like a cabin door on a plane. And it was warm, noticeably, uncomfortably warm, even though he couldn't hear any heating system running. He scanned the room with his phone. Everything looked completely normal. Then he pointed the camera at the wall behind the headboard. The paint was pristine, freshly painted, he realized. You could still faintly detect the smell of latex primer beneath the stale air. Someone had repainted that wall. Recently, he crossed the room and pressed his palm flat against the fresh white paint. It was warm, and then, very faintly, barely audible, he heard it, what Gerald Prout had described. The slow, rhythmic sound drawing in, releasing. Too slow for a person, too regular for a machine. Marcus stepped back. He looked at the wall. The room was maybe 12 feet wide, but looking at it from inside, the distance between the window wall and the headboard wall, it felt closer to 9 or 10. He went back into the hallway. He counted the width of room 306's exterior from the hall. 12 feet of wall, give or take. Then he found the room on the other side. Room 305 was listed as a storage unit on the hotel's floor plan he'd gotten from county records. He put his hand on the wall of the hallway between the 2 rooms. It was warm, too. Marcus stood very still in that empty hallway at 1 a.m. in a 40-year-old hotel in rural Ohio, and he understood that the space between room 306 and what had been room 305 was not a structural wall. It was a room inside a room, built into the architecture of the building over time, walled off, sealed, heated. Someone or something was living in the wall. Marcus called the Guernsey County Sheriff's Office the next morning. He spent 3 hours explaining what he'd found, showing them his photographs and his video footage, and reading Gerald Prout's account aloud. A detective named Sandra Okafor listened to all of it without expression. 2 days later, With a warrant, sheriff's deputies entered the Crestview Motor Inn and opened the space between rooms 305 and 306. Inside, they found a man. His name was Raymond Dale Fitch. He was 57 years old. He had been living in that concealed space, roughly 8 feet wide, 12 feet long, and 6 feet tall, for 11 years. Raymond Fitch was not a supernatural entity. He was not a monster. He was a former maintenance worker who had been employed at the Crestview Motor Inn from 2001 to 2008. When the hotel changed ownership and let him go, he had nowhere to go. He had no family, no savings, a history of mental illness that had gone untreated for most of his adult life. He had simply stayed. Using his knowledge of the building structure, he had sealed himself into the crawl space between the 2 rooms, running a tap into the hotel's plumbing, wiring a heating element into an unused circuit. He had built himself a life in a space that no one knew existed. When guests stayed in room 306, Raymond could hear them through the wall, and in the dark, in the silence of rural Ohio, at 2 a.m, sometimes he forgot that the people on the other side of the wall couldn't hear him back. Sometimes he breathed too loudly. Sometimes, in moments of profound loneliness, he pressed his hands against the drywall and whispered, "The messages in the paint, I'm inside," were not threats. According to the psychiatric evaluation conducted after his removal, Raymond had been writing those words as a form of confession, a message he never expected anyone to read, something between a prayer and a scream. Diane, the hotel manager, knew he was there. She had discovered him in 2013 after a guest reported hearing sounds from the wall. She'd confronted him, and instead of calling the police, she had made a quiet decision, the same kind of quiet decision that gets made in small towns, in struggling businesses, in places where the official answer would cause more problems than the unofficial one. She left him there, closed the room, filed no permits, told no one, and absorbed Raymond Fitch into the infrastructure of the building like he was a load-bearing wall. She was arrested and charged with unlawful confinement, among other charges. Raymond Fitch was hospitalized and, for the first time in over a decade, treated. Marcus Webb published his piece in April 2021. It was picked up by 3 national outlets within 48 hours. He got 200,000 new subscribers in a week. He still drives the 2011 Civic. The Crestview Motor Inn was sold at county auction in 2022. The new owners gutted the entire second floor during renovation. In the debris, behind where the wall of room 306 had stood, workers found something that hadn't been mentioned in any of the official reports. Scratched into the original plaster, the layer underneath the drywall, underneath the fresh paint, in handwriting that was older and more desperate than the words on the surface. "Please come back. I've been here so long. I just want someone to know I exist. Room 306 doesn't exist anymore. Not the room, not the wall, not the space between. But Raymond Fitch does. He's alive. He's in a care facility outside of Columbus. He paints now. Actual canvas, actual brushes. His caseworker says he's doing better. And sometimes when he finishes a painting, he signs his name in the corner. Small, careful, just so someone knows he was there." If this story stayed with you after the screen went dark, leave a like. It really helps the channel reach more people who enjoy strange, unsettling stories like this one. And if you want more late-night mysteries, forgotten places, and stories that don't always have clean endings, subscribe. There's always another one waiting. See you in the next story.